They don't have to invade you to bankrupt you. They don't have to fire a missile to raise your cost of living. They just have to touch two levers at the same time. Lever 1, the currency. Lever 2, the materials that everything runs on. And today, the market is finally noticing what this really is. Not trade tension, not headline noise. This is resource warfare against the US dollar system. Because the play is simple. China can let the yuan drift in a direction that protects its exporters, while it tightens control over silver and rare earths, the inputs that America cannot print. And when the raw inputs get scarce, the price doesn't rise in yuan, it rises in dollars. That's how you get export-driven inflation, not from wages, not from consumers, from a bottleneck you can't substitute. So if you're asking, why is everything tech and defense and energy suddenly more expensive? This is why. This is the moment where the world starts treating metals the way it used to treat oil. And silver, yes, silver, has been quietly reclassified as strategic by the United States, with the USGS critical minerals list expanding and explicitly recommending silver for inclusion, with the final list published in the Federal Register in November 2025. Now let's break the mechanism down, cleanly, so you don't get emotionally farmed. China's two-lever attack, currency plus metals. A lot of people are saying China devalued the yuan today. Here's the precise version. China runs a managed system with a daily midpoint fixing. The midpoint was set around 7.0230 per dollar, and reporting also noted it was weaker than market estimates. But the yuan has also been trading near its strongest levels in well over a year, depending on the session. So the point isn't a cartoon one-day devaluation. The point is intent. China can guide the currency so it supports their export machine without needing a dramatic press conference move. Now the second story, the one that matters more for 2026, China is tightening who can export strategic metals. And this is not theory. China's Ministry of Commerce published a whitelist approach for 2026-2027 that allows only 44 companies to export silver, while also listing limited counts for other strategic metals like tungsten and antimony. Translation: this isn't free market silver supply anymore, it's state-managed supply. And the moment supply becomes administrative, price becomes political. Now add rare earths. Reuters reporting in 2025 described China expanding rare earth export controls, adding elements and tightening scrutiny, rules designed to entrench China's dominance across the supply chain. And other coverage has emphasized China's scale advantage, dominant shares of mining, processing, and magnet production, while describing how licensing can throttle supply even without an outright ban. So here's the setup. Currency lever. Protect competitiveness. Shape trade flows. Metal lever. Raise the cost of strategic manufacturing in the West. That combination is how you pressure the dollar system without touching the Fed directly. Let's say you're an American manufacturer. You sell EVs, batteries, robotics, defense electronics, solar infrastructure. You can redesign the plastic parts. You can find a new supplier for packaging, but you cannot wish rare earth magnets into existence. You cannot software update your way out of silver. These are not optional inputs. So what happens when China tightens export licensing? Two things happen at once. One, time becomes the tax. Licensing systems don't just raise price. They create uncertainty, delays, approvals, paperwork, compliance. The cost isn't only metal up X%. The cost is our line stops if a shipment slips. And once production lines are threatened, companies overbuy. That's panic buying, not from Reddit. From procurement departments with a mandate, do not miss delivery. 2. The dollar price becomes the pressure point, because the US buys these inputs in global trade. And global trade is still dollar-centric. So if supply gets administratively tight, the price rises where the dollar clears. That's why this is a dollar story. It's a way of exporting inflation into the US industrial base. Not consumer inflation first, factory inflation first. Then it bleeds outward. And this is why the US even moved to designate more minerals as critical in the first place, with the USGS Critical Minerals List expanding in 2025, and the final list published in November. Why silver is the perfect weapon? Silver is the most misunderstood strategic metal on Earth. Because people still talk about it like it's just jewelry or coins. No. Silver is a dual-use metal. Industrial conductivity, defense electronics, solar EVs, high reliability components. And the silver market has a structural problem. It's small, it's thin, and it has been running supply deficits. Reuters reporting late 2025 described silver's surge and noted ongoing supply tightness, with strong demand from sectors like solar and electrification themes. Reuters. So imagine that backdrop. And then China says, only these companies can export. That's not a normal commodity rule. That is strategic posture. And it matches the broader pattern. China has used export restrictions and licensing on multiple critical minerals in recent years, including targeted controls announced in 2025. So if you're China, why silver? Because it hits the West exactly where the West is most fragile. Energy transition, advanced electronics defense supply chains, high-tech manufacturing margins. Oil shocks hit consumers first. Silver shocks hit production first. And production shocks are how you break empires. Now layer rare earths on top. Rare earths are not rare like diamonds. They're rare like the refining and processing is concentrated. That's the choke point. In 2025, reporting described China expanding rare earth controls and adding new requirements that can even reach foreign producers if Chinese inputs or equipment are involved. And other reporting has described how these restrictions can create real-world shortages and disrupt industries. So when people ask, why does a licensing memo matter? Because the modern economy is not built on finished products. It's built on inputs. If the input gets throttled, your entire GDP becomes hostage. That's why the US and allies keep signing minerals deals and trying to build alternatives, because they know China's dominance is strategic. The Guardian. Now let's connect the final dot. How does this hit the US dollar? It hits the dollar in 3 ways. A. Higher input costs. Higher import bill. If the US must pay more dollars for the same tonnage of strategic inputs, that is pressure. B. It forces policy responses that debase. If critical supply chains are threatened, governments do what they always do: subsidies, emergency procurement, strategic stockpiles, industrial policy spending, and spending tends to be financed. C. It weaponizes confidence. The dollar system runs on trust. If strategic inputs are no longer guaranteed, the world stops trusting just in time. They overorder, they hoard, they reroute, and hoarding is inflation. If you want the next 72 hours mapped like a war room, hit like, subscribe, and comment Metal War so I know you're tracking this with me. Because in the next section, I'm giving you the checklist: what to watch, what matters, what's noise, and where the traps are. What to watch: the War Room Checklist 1. China export licensing updates. Watch for any tightening language, reduced approvals, national security phrasing, expanded categories. Because the silver exporter whitelist approach is already real for 2026-2027. 2. Rare earth shipment approval cadence. Watch backlog auto and electronic supply warnings, magnet export fluctuations, because the regime has been described as stringent and designed to entrench leverage. 3. The paper versus physical tension signals. Even when futures calm down, reality shows up in persistent premiums, delivery delays, tighter inventory, offers elevated financing rates for physical sourcing. And yes, this is where narratives get wild, so keep it evidence-based. 4. U.S. critical minerals policy escalation. This is the political tailwind for strategic silver narratives, with the critical minerals list expanding and including silver in the final 2025 list. 5. Dollar stress indicators. Watch USD funding stress headlines, sharp DXY spikes, repo volatility, anything that signals dollar scarcity. Because dollar spikes smash commodities temporarily, then the system often responds with liquidity. The trap people will fall into. Here's the trap. Most people will look at the yuan and say, if China weakens currency, imports get cheaper, inflation down. That is consumer goods logic. But strategic input logic is different. Because China can keep finished goods competitive, while tightening the inputs that Western industry needs to compete. So the US consumer might see cheap widgets, while the US manufacturer sees expensive materials. And when manufacturers lose margin, they do one thing. They pass it on. That's inflation. Not from wage growth, from a bottleneck. And the worst part is, it doesn't show up as a clean CPI shock at first. It shows up as delayed deliveries, temporary shortages, price increases due to supply chain, reduced features, substitution to lower quality reshoring costs that raise prices anyway. That's the slow burn. What this means for silver's price behavior. Now, I'm not going to tell you silver goes up in a straight line. Silver is violent, it rips, it flushes, it humiliates both sides. But the strategic backdrop matters. Silver has been moving like a strategic metal in 2025, with reporting describing record highs and tightness narratives. Reuters. And when a market is tight, policy shocks do more damage. A small market plus policy restriction equals outsized moves. That's not hype, that's mechanics. Scenario 1. Managed pressure. China keeps licensing tight but stable. Prices rise slowly. West adapts. Inflation is persistent, not explosive. Scenario 2. Choke. Approvals slow. Backlogs grow. Industries overbuy. Physical premiums surge. Scenario 3. Escalation loop. The US responds with tariffs, restrictions, subsidies. China responds with more controls. Feedback loop forms. And history says, once both sides learn the leverage, they use it. That's why the world is scrambling for non-China supply chains. So here's the verdict. This is not a silver story. This is not a rare earth story. This is not a China story. This is a story about the next era. Strategic inputs become currency. And if China can influence the price of strategic metals in dollars, the availability of strategic metals to the West, and the timing of approvals, then it can export inflation into America's industrial base while simultaneously protecting its own export machine through currency management. That's the two-lever attack. So do not watch this like entertainment. Watch it like a supply chain war. Because it doesn't end with a headline. It ends with who controls the inputs, controlling the future.